When tech mogul Harrison Blackwood decided to auction off his deceased maid's belongings to make room for his new art collection, he thought the old music box would fetch maybe $50. He had no idea that the seemingly worthless trinket contained a secret that would cost him his billion-dollar empire. The maid's daughter, brilliant MIT graduate Elena Rodriguez, had been waiting 23 years for this moment. What Harrison saw as trash was actually the key to the biggest financial scandal in Silicon Valley history, and Elena was about to use it to destroy the man who had destroyed her family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwood mansion as Elena Rodriguez stood in the servants' entrance, her hands trembling as she clutched the estate sale catalogue. 23 years had passed since her mother Maria had died in this very house, collapsing from exhaustion while scrubbing the marble floors of Harrison Blackwood's foyer. 23 years since 14-year-old Elena had been escorted off the property with nothing but the clothes on her back and a promise that her mother's belongings would be donated to charity. That promise, like so many others Harrison Blackwood had made, had been a lie. Elena's eyes scanned the catalogue until she found it. Lot 247, vintage music box. Estimated value $25.75. The photograph was small and grainy, but she would have recognized that carved wooden rose anywhere. It had sat on her mother's nightstand in their tiny room in the servants' quarters, playing the same haunting melody every night before bedtime. Elena remembered tracing the delicate engravings with her small fingers while her mother told her stories about their family back in Mexico, about the grandfather who had crafted the music box with his own hands for his beloved daughter. "It's not just a music box, Mija," Maria had whispered during their last conversation in the hospital. "It holds our family's most precious secret. Promise me you'll get it back someday." Elena had made that promise, but getting into Harvard on a full scholarship and then completing her PhD in computer science at MIT had taken precedence. Building her cybersecurity firm from the ground up, becoming one of the youngest female tech entrepreneurs to crack the Fortune 500, all of it had been preparation for this moment. The auction house buzzed with wealthy collectors and casual browsers. Elena kept her head down, wearing designer clothes that had cost her more than her mother had earned in 6 months, her long black hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon that would have made Maria proud. She looked like she belonged here among the elite, but inside, she was still that scared 14-year-old girl watching her world crumble. Harrison Blackwood stood near the front of the room, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit impeccable. At 68, he still commanded attention, still possessed the kind of presence that had built an empire from a small software startup in his garage. He was laughing with potential buyers, treating the auction of her mother's life like a social event. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to Lot 247, the auctioneer announced. A charming vintage music box, perfect for collectors of small curiosities. Elena's heart pounded as the music box appeared on the display screen. Even in the harsh auction house lighting, she could see the familiar worn spots where her mother's fingers had touched it thousands of times. "Do I hear $25? A few hands went up lazily. Elena waited, watching Harrison from the corner of her eye. He wasn't even paying attention, too busy discussing his latest acquisition with a woman dripping in diamonds. $50. 75? Eleanor raised her paddle. $500. The room fell silent. Even Harrison turned to see who had made such an unusual bid on such a modest item. $500 to paddle 127, the auctioneer said, clearly pleased. "Do I hear 600? No one else bid. Why would they? It was just an old music box. Nothing special to anyone except the woman who understood its true value. Sold to paddle 127 for $500. Elena's hands shook as she filled out the purchase form. When the music box was handed to her, wrapped in tissue paper, she had to resist the urge to unwrap it immediately. Instead, she clutched it to her chest and walked calmly toward the exit. "Excuse me," a voice called behind her. She turned to find Harrison Blackwood approaching, his pale blue eyes curious. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his expression still held the same cold calculation she remembered from her childhood. "I couldn't help but notice your interest in that particular piece," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Forgive my curiosity, but what drew you to it?" "It was part of an employee's effects, hardly museum quality." Elena felt 23 years of rage boiling beneath her composed surface. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "the most valuable things are the ones other people throw away." Harrison's smile was patronizing. "How philosophical. Well, I hope it brings you joy." Maria, that was her name, I believe. She was quite devoted to it. Played it every night, drove the rest of the staff to distraction with that tinkling melody. He remembered her mother's name. After all these years, after treating Maria Rodriguez like a piece of furniture, he actually remembered her name. Elena wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. "I'm sure she treasured it," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "Indeed, such a shame when she passed. Heart attack, wasn't it? The stress of the work, perhaps. These people aren't built for the demands of maintaining a property like mine. These people..." Elena's grip on the music box tightened. "Anyway," Harrison continued, "I'm having another auction next month. Some truly spectacular pieces. Actual art, you understand. If you're interested in collecting, you should attend." "I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Blackwood." He looked pleased that she recognized him. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met?" "I don't think so," Eleanor lied smoothly. "I have one of those faces." That night, in the privacy of her penthouse apartment, Eleanor finally unwrapped the music box. Her mother's scent still lingered faintly on the wood, a mixture of lemon cleaner and the lavender soap she'd saved her pennies to buy. Elena wound the tiny key and let the familiar melody fill the silence, transporting her back to that cramped servants' room where she'd felt safe despite their poverty. But she wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here for the secret her mother had mentioned, the one that had taken Elena years of careful research to understand. With practiced precision, she examined every inch of the music box until she found what she was looking for, a tiny catch hidden beneath the base. When she pressed it, a small compartment slid open, revealing a thin stack of photocopied documents, yellowed with age. Elena's breath caught as she recognized the letterhead, Blackwood Technologies, dated 1987. The documents detailed a series of financial transactions, coded communications, and most damning of all, a confession letter written in Harrison Blackwood's own handwriting, admitting to embezzling funds from his early investors to keep his failing company afloat. Her mother hadn't just been Harrison's maid. She'd been his bookkeeper's assistant in the early days, before his empire was built, before he could afford to hide his crimes behind layers of corporate bureaucracy. Maria had discovered the evidence of his fraud, and being the honest woman she was, had copied the documents before confronting him. That confrontation had ended her career and eventually her life. Harrison had fired her, but not before ensuring she'd never work in the financial sector again. The stress of poverty, of working multiple jobs to support her daughter, of never being able to use her education and skills, it had all contributed to the heart condition that eventually killed her. But Maria Rodriguez had been smarter than Harrison Blackwood ever gave her credit for. She'd kept the evidence, hidden it in the one place he'd never think to look, and passed the secret to her daughter with a dying wish for justice. Elena spread the documents across her glass dining table, her computer science background allowing her to quickly understand the implications. The statute of limitations had long since expired for criminal prosecution, but civil suits were another matter entirely. More importantly, these documents would prove that Harrison Blackwood's entire empire was built on stolen money. A revelation that would destroy investor confidence and tank his stock price overnight. She photographed each document with professional precision, then carefully returned them to their hiding place. The music box would stay with her, but the copies would go to work. The next morning, Elena began making phone calls. First to her contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission, then to several investigative journalists she'd cultivated relationships with over the years. The story would break within a week, she estimated. By then, she'd be ready with the second phase of her plan. As she sat in her office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Elena wound the music box one more time. The melody drifted through the air, carrying with it the weight of decades of injustice and the promise of revenge finally served. Harrison Blackwood had no idea that his billion-dollar empire was about to come crashing down, all because he'd been too arrogant to properly dispose of a dead maid's possessions. He was about to learn that some secrets, like some melodies, never truly fade away. 3 days after the auction, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her contact at the Wall Street Journal. Documents authenticated. Running the story tomorrow morning. Hope you're ready for this. Elena set down her coffee and walked to the window of her corner office at CyberShield Technologies. The morning fog was lifting from the bay, revealing the city that had become her battlefield. Somewhere across town, Harrison Blackwood was probably having his usual breakfast meeting, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, but Elena wasn't content to simply watch from the sidelines. The leaked documents would cause damage, certainly, but she needed more than just a newspaper scandal. She needed to understand exactly how deep Blackwood's corruption ran, and more importantly, she needed to find his current vulnerabilities. Her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Rodriguez. "There's a woman here to see you. Says it's about the Blackwood investigation. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems urgent," Elena frowned. The story hadn't broken yet. How could anyone know about her investigation? "Send her in." The woman who entered was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, but with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. Her graying blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she clutched a leather portfolio like it contained state secrets. "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Catherine Walsh. I was Harrison Blackwood's personal accountant for 15 years, until I was let go. Last month." She paused, studying Elena's face carefully. "I think we might be able to help each other." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What makes you think I'm investigating Harrison Blackwood?" Catherine's laugh was bitter. "Because I've been watching him destroy people for decades, and you have the look of someone who's finally ready to fight back. Plus, I saw you at the auction. I was there too, watching him sell off Maria Rodriguez's belongings like they were garage sale trash." Elena's pulse quickened. "You knew my mother?" "Maria was the only honest person in that house. When I first started working for Harrison, she tried to warn me about what kind of man he really was. I should have listened." Catherine opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick folder. "These are copies of financial records from the past 5 years. Things that would make those 1987 documents look like petty cash theft." Elena leaned forward. "What kind of things?" "Shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Fake charitable foundations that funnel money back to his personal accounts. Employee pension funds that have been systematically drained to cover his gambling debts. Yes, the great Harrison Blackwood has a serious problem with high-stakes poker games in Macau." Catherine's voice grew steadier as she spoke. "And then there's the insurance fraud." "Insurance fraud?" Catherine pulled out a series of photographs. "Last year, Harrison claimed that a priceless Ming vase was stolen from his home. Collected $2 million in insurance money. Except I have photos proving he sold that vase to a private collector 6 months before the supposed theft. He still has the receipt." Elena studied the photographs, her mind racing. "Why are you coming to me with this? Why not go to the authorities yourself?" "Because Harrison Blackwood has been buying from authorities for 40 years. Half the judges in this city owe their positions to his campaign contributions. The FBI agent who would handle white-collar crime cases. His daughter got a full scholarship to Stanford courtesy of the Blackwood Foundation. Catherine's eyes hardened. I tried going through official channels when I first discovered the pension fund theft. You know what happened? I got fired, my professional references were destroyed, and suddenly no accounting firm in the state would hire me. Elena recognized the pattern. It was exactly what had happened to her mother, just with higher stakes and more sophisticated methods. But you, Catherine continued, you have something he can't buy or intimidate. You have a legitimate business, public reputation, and most importantly, you have nothing left to lose when it comes to him. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking. What do you want in return? I want to see him lose everything, the same way he's destroyed everyone who ever crossed him. And I want those pension funds returned to the employees he's been stealing from. People who trusted him with their retirement savings. Elena extended her hand. Then we're partners. As Catherine left her office, Elena's computer chimed with a news alert. The Wall Street Journal story had gone live. Tech mogul's empire built on fraud. Documents reveal decades-old embezzlement scheme. Within hours, the story exploded across social media. Blackwood Technologies' stock price plummeted 15% in the first hour of trading. Elena's phone rang constantly, reporters wanting comments, competitors smelling blood in the water, and investors trying to gauge how deep the scandal ran. But Elena was focused on something else entirely. She pulled up the architectural plans for Blackwood's mansion, which were public record, due to a permit filed 3 years earlier for a wine cellar expansion. If Harrison was as paranoid as Catherine suggested, there would be a private safe somewhere in that house containing the original documents. For all his illegal activities, Elena had learned long ago that wealthy criminals always kept insurance, policies, evidence that could implicate their co-conspirators if things went wrong. It was a twisted form of mutually assured destruction that kept everyone in line. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Ms. Rodriguez. This is James Patterson from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about the Blackwood story. I'm not sure what you mean, Elena replied carefully. Come on, Ms. Rodriguez, we know the documents came from you. Harrison Blackwood held a press conference an hour ago claiming he's the victim of a vendetta by the daughter of a disgruntled former employee. He specifically mentioned your name. Elena's blood ran cold. He'd remembered her after all. No comment, she said, hanging up quickly. She immediately called her head of security. Marcus, I need a full threat assessment on my building and my home. And I want background checks on every employee hired in the past 6 months. Trouble. Marcus's voice was calm but alert. Harrison Blackwood just declared war. That evening, Elena sat in her apartment with all the blinds drawn, surrounded by the evidence she and Catherine had compiled. The music box sat open on her coffee table, its melody providing a strange soundtrack to her planning. Her laptop showed a live news feed where Harrison Blackwood stood behind a podium, his face a mask of righteous indignation. These accusations are the desperate revenge fantasy of someone who has harbored resentment for over 2 decades. Elena Rodriguez's mother was terminated for cause after we discovered discrepancies in the household accounts. This is nothing more than an attempt to destroy a legitimate business built through hard work and innovation. Elena laughed darkly. Even now, even caught red-handed with his own confession letter, Harrison was trying to turn himself into the victim. He was painting her mother as a thief, reversing the roles completely. But as she watched him speak, Elena noticed something interesting. His left hand had a slight tremor, and he kept touching his wedding ring. Tells she recognized from her days studying behavioral analysis for her cybersecurity work. Harrison Blackwood was scared. Good, because Elena was just getting started. Her phone rang again. This time it was Catherine. Did you see the news conference? Catherine asked. Every lying word. Then you know what comes next. He's going to come after us with everything he has. Legal teams, private investigators, maybe worse. Elena looked at her mother's music box, remembering all the nights Maria had worked late into the evening, cleaning up after people who saw her as invisible. "Let him come," Elena said quietly. "I've been preparing for this fight my entire life." She closed the laptop and picked up her phone to make another call. If Harrison Blackwood wanted to play dirty, she had a few surprises of her own. Elena's call was to her old MIT roommate, Dr. Sarah Kim, who now worked as a forensic digital analyst for the FBI's white-collar crime division. They met at a small coffee shop in Chinatown, far from the financial district where Elena might be recognized. "You realize you've kicked over the biggest hornet's nest in Silicon Valley?" Sarah said, sliding into the booth across from Elena. "Blackwood's lawyers have already filed 3 defamation suits this morning against you. The Wall Street Journal and that accountant who's been talking to reporters, Catherine Walsh, and I expected as much." Elena sipped her green tea, appearing calmer than she felt. "What I need from you is unofficial guidance on evidence preservation." Hypothetically speaking, Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Hypothetically? If someone had additional evidence of financial crimes, but that evidence was obtained through unconventional means, what would be the best way to ensure it reached the right people without compromising its validity?" "Elena, please tell me you're not planning to break into Harrison Blackwood's house." Elena's silence was enough. "Okay. Hypothetically speaking," Sarah continued with a sigh, "any evidence obtained through illegal entry would be inadmissible in court. However, if that same evidence were to surface through a legitimate search warrant based on probable cause from already public information, the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine wouldn't apply if the evidence was discovered independently through legal means." "Exactly. But Elena, if you're caught breaking and entering, I can't help you. And Blackwood has the kind of security that makes Fort Knox look like a suburban garage." That afternoon, Elena drove to the hills above Blackwood's estate, parking at a scenic overlook popular with tourists. Using high-powered binoculars, she studied the property she'd once called home. The mansion had been extensively renovated since her childhood, but she remembered the basic layout. More importantly, she remembered the service entrances her mother had used daily. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or face consequences. This is your only warning." Elena screenshot the message and forwarded it to both Sarah and Catherine. Blackwood was escalating faster than she'd anticipated, which meant she was on the right track. That evening, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor at her apartment building. The doorman called up to announce that Detective Ray Morrison from the SFPD was in the lobby. Morrison was a heavy-set man in his 50s with tired eyes and the kind of patient demeanor that came from 20 years of dealing with white-collar criminals. He settled into Elena's living room chair with the ease of someone comfortable in uncomfortable situations. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm investigating a break-in at Harrison Blackwood's estate that occurred 3 nights ago. Nothing was taken, but his security system shows someone accessed his home office." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that. Why are you telling me this?" "Because Mr. Blackwood seems to think you might know something about it. He's quite insistent that recent events have made you unstable. Detective Morrison, 3 nights ago I was having dinner with my business partner at Chez Laurent. I can provide receipts, security footage, and witness statements." Morrison nodded, making notes. "I figured as much. But I have to ask these questions, you understand. Mr. Blackwood is a prominent citizen, and when prominent citizens make accusations, you have to investigate." "I understand completely." "Good. Now, off the record, I've been a cop long enough to recognize when someone with power is trying to use the system to intimidate someone without it. Whatever's going on between you and Blackwood, I suggest you be very careful. Men like him don't play fair." After Morrison left, Elena paced her apartment thinking. Someone had broken into Blackwood's house, but it wasn't her. Either he was manufacturing evidence to frame her, or someone else was playing the same game she was. Her phone rang. Catherine's voice was shaky. "Elena, they fired my daughter." What? Rebecca worked at Morrison Financial. She's been there for 8 years. Spotless record, just got promoted to senior analyst last month. Today, they called her into HR and said they were eliminating her position due to budget cuts. But Elena, Morrison Financial handles 3 of Blackwood's subsidiary accounts. This isn't a coincidence. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility. Her war with Blackwood was spreading, hurting innocent people. Catherine, I'm sorry. I never meant for... Don't apologize. This just proves how desperate he's getting. But it also means we're running out of time. If he's willing to destroy my daughter's career, what's he planning for us? The answer came the next morning. Elena arrived at her office to find her assistant waiting with a grim expression and a manila envelope. This was delivered by courier an hour ago, she said. The man wouldn't give his name. Inside the envelope were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of Elena leaving her apartment, entering her office building, meeting with Catherine, having coffee with Sarah. Someone had been following her for weeks, documenting her every move. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. I know about your mother's music box. I know about the documents. I know about your plans. Meet me tonight at Pier 39 North End, 11 p.m. Come alone, or everyone you care about will suffer the same fate as Maria Rodriguez. Elena's hands trembled as she read the last line. The same fate as Maria Rodriguez. Was Blackwood implying that her mother's death hadn't been natural? She immediately called Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the cardiologist who had treated her mother in her final days. Dr. Hendricks was retired now, but agreed to meet Elena that afternoon at her former hospital. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Dr. Hendricks said, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. I still remember how she worried more about you than about her own condition. Dr. Hendricks, I need to ask you something difficult. Is there any possibility that my mother's heart attack wasn't entirely natural? The older woman was quiet for a long moment. Elena, I've wondered about that for 23 years. Your mother's heart condition was real, but the timing of her death was unusual. She was responding well to treatment. Her stress levels had stabilized after she found that new job at the accounting firm. But the night she died, she was extremely agitated. Kept saying someone had been calling her, threatening her, telling her to keep quiet about something. I assumed it was related to stress from her financial situation, but now... Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. Did you report this to anyone? I mentioned it to the police, but they said there was no evidence of foul play. Heart attacks in people with pre-existing conditions aren't uncommon, especially under stress. And your mother was undocumented, so... Dr. Hendricks trailed off, but Elena understood. In 2001, an undocumented immigrant's death didn't warrant much investigation, especially when the cause appeared natural. That evening, Elena stood at Pier 39 as fog rolled in from the bay. The tourist crowds had thinned to a few late diners and couples taking romantic walks. She checked her watch, 10:58 p.m. Footsteps approached from behind. Elena turned to see a man in his 30s, well-dressed but nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. Ms. Rodriguez? I'm David Chen, Harrison Blackwood's personal IT director. Or I was, until this morning when I found out he's planning to frame me for embezzling from the company pension fund. Elena studied his face. You're the one who broke into his house, David nodded. I've been maintaining his personal computer systems for 5 years. I know where every digital skeleton is buried. When I saw those 1987 documents in the news, I realized he was going to need a scapegoat for the modern crimes too. Someone with access to all the financial systems. So you decided to get there first. I copied everything from his personal server before he could delete it. Bank records, email communications, audio recordings of phone calls. Elena, your mother didn't just discover his embezzlement. She found out he was laundering money for organized crime figures. That's why she died. David pulled out a flash drive. This contains 5 years of evidence, proving Harrison Blackwood has been using his tech company to wash money for the Torino crime family. Your mother threatened to expose not just corporate fraud, but connections to people who kill witnesses. Elena's blood ran cold. And you think they killed her? I think Harrison made one phone call, and your mother's stress levels suddenly became fatal. But I also think this drive contains enough evidence to put him away for life, and to bring down 3 other major executives who've been helping him. Elena took the flash drive, feeling its weight. Why are you risking this? Why help me? David's expression hardened. Because my grandfather came to this country the same way your mother did, looking for a better life for his family. And because men like Harrison Blackwood have been destroying people like us for too long. As Elena walked back to her car, the flash drive secure in her jacket pocket, she realized the game had changed completely. This was no longer about business fraud or even personal revenge. She was holding evidence that could bring down not just a corrupt billionaire, but an entire criminal network. And somewhere in the shadows, Harrison Blackwood was planning his next move, unaware that his own IT director had just handed Elena the keys to his destruction. Elena spent the entire night analyzing David Chen's flash drive. Her apartment transformed into a war room with printouts covering every surface. The scope of Harrison Blackwood's criminal empire was staggering. What had started as simple embezzlement in 1987 had evolved into a sophisticated money laundering operation processing millions of dollars monthly. For the Torino family, the audio files were the most damning. Harrison's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing cleaning payments from what he called Tony's people and routing them through fake software development contracts. But it was a recording from March 15, 2001, just 3 days before her mother's death, that made Elena's blood run cold. The Rodriguez woman is becoming a problem, Harrison's voice said. She's been asking questions about the Cayman transfers. Another voice, gravelly and unfamiliar. You want this handled permanently or just scared off? I leave that to your discretion, Vincent. But she needs to stop digging one way or another. Elena had to pause the recording, her hands shaking. Vincent Torino. She recognized the name from organized crime reports she'd researched. Maria Rodriguez hadn't died from workplace stress. She'd been murdered because she'd stumbled onto evidence that could have destroyed both Harrison's empire and the Torino family's money laundering operation. At 6 a.m., Elena called the one person she knew could handle evidence this explosive, FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres, whom she'd met during a cybersecurity consultation the previous year. They agreed to meet at a secure location, the FBI field office in downtown San Francisco. Agent Torres was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes with organized crime connections. She listened without interruption as Elena explained everything, then spent 2 hours reviewing the flash drive contents. Ms. Rodriguez, what you've brought me is enough to launch the biggest RICO investigation on the West Coast in 20 years, Torres finally said. But I need you to understand the danger you're in. Vincent Torino has been suspected in at least 12 murders over the past 3 decades. If he killed your mother on Blackwood's orders, and now you're threatening to expose their entire operation, they'll try to kill me too. Almost certainly. We can offer you protective custody, but given Blackwood's connections in local law enforcement, I'd recommend federal protection. Elena shook her head. If I disappear into witness protection, Blackwood wins. He'll destroy the evidence, eliminate other witnesses, and rebuild somewhere else. How long before you can move on this? With evidence this comprehensive? We could have arrest warrants within 72 hours. But Elena, you need to understand that once we move, there's no going back. Blackwood will know the information came from you. Good, Elena said quietly. I want him to know. That afternoon, Elena received an unexpected call from her building's security desk. Ms. Rodriguez, there's a gentleman here who says he's your uncle. Miguel Rodriguez. Elena's heart stopped. She didn't have an uncle named Miguel. All her relatives lived in Mexico and used different surnames after various marriages. This was clearly one of Torino's people. Tell him I'm not available and to make an appointment through my office, she instructed. And then immediately called Agent Torres. We're moving you to a safe house tonight. Torres said without preamble. My team just intercepted communications, suggesting there's a contract out on you. But Elena had a different plan. Instead of hiding, she was going to force Harrison Blackwood into the open. That evening, she held a press conference at her company's headquarters. The room was packed with reporters who'd been following the Blackwood scandal for days. Elena stood at the podium, composed, despite knowing that Vincent Torino's assassins might be in the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here tonight to reveal the truth about my mother's death and Harrison Blackwood's criminal enterprise. She looked directly into the cameras. 23 years ago, Maria Rodriguez was murdered because she discovered that Blackwood Technologies was being used to launder money for organized crime. I have audio recordings of Harrison Blackwood ordering her death. The room erupted in shouting questions, but Elena continued. These recordings, along with 5 years of financial records proving ongoing money laundering operations, have been turned over to federal authorities. Mr. Blackwood, if you're watching, this is for Maria Rodriguez. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Within an hour of the press conference, Elena's phone rang. Harrison Blackwood's voice was ice-cold with rage. You have no idea what you've done, Elena. Do you think the FBI can protect you forever? Do you think Vincent Torino forgives and forgets? I think Vincent Torino is about to have bigger problems than one woman seeking justice for her mother. Your mother was a naive fool who stuck her nose where it didn't belong, just like you're doing now. My mother was a hero who died trying to expose your crimes. And unlike her, I have the resources to finish what she started. Harrison's laugh was ugly. Resources? You mean your little cybersecurity company? How unfortunate that your servers seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties. Eleanor looked at her laptop screen, which had suddenly gone dark. Across the office, she could see her employees frantically trying to restore their systems. Blackwood was launching a cyber attack on her company. Impressive, Eleanor said into the phone. But you should know that I've been preparing for this contingency. What contingency? The one where you'd try to destroy my business in retaliation. See, Harrison, you taught me something valuable about keeping insurance policies. While you were busy attacking my company's servers, my automated systems were releasing every piece of evidence I've gathered about your crimes to news outlets, regulatory agencies, and law enforcement across 3 states. She could hear typing in the background of the call, Harrison frantically trying to stop the data release. You can't stop it, Eleanor continued. In 30 minutes, every major news organization in the country will have documentation proving that Harrison Blackwood has been operating a criminal enterprise for over 2 decades. Your stock price will crash, your assets will be frozen, and Vincent Torino will probably decide you've become too much of a liability. You're signing your own death warrant, Harrison snarled. Maybe, but I'm also signing yours. The call ended, and Elena immediately activated the emergency protocol she'd established with Agent Torres. Within minutes, FBI agents were escorting her from the building as news vans began arriving outside. As her convoy pulled away from CyberShield Technologies, Elena watched through the rear window as reporters surrounded the building. Her phone buzzed constantly with news alerts. Blackwood Technologies stock had been halted after dropping 40% in after-hours trading, and federal prosecutors were announcing a major organized crime investigation. But the most satisfying alert came from a financial news app. Breaking. Harrison Blackwood arrested at San Francisco International Airport, attempting to board private jet to Switzerland. Elena smiled, remembering her mother's words from so many years ago. Sometimes, Mija, the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth. Maria Rodriguez had tried to tell the truth and died for it. But her daughter had lived long enough to ensure that truth finally saw the light. In her secure federal vehicle, Eleanor opened the music box one more time. The familiar melody played softly as she watched the city lights blur past. Knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also the first real justice her family had seen in 23 years. Harrison Blackwood's empire was crumbling, But Eleanor's real work was just beginning. Vincent Torino was still out there, and there were other victims of both men who deserved their own measure of justice. The music box's melody faded as Elena closed the lid, but the fight for truth would continue until every last secret was exposed and every crime answered for. 6 months after Harrison Blackwood's arrest, Elena sat in the witness stand of the federal courthouse in downtown San Francisco. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former Blackwood employees, and families of other victims who had emerged once the truth became public. Harrison sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his once perfect silver hair now disheveled, his empire reduced to ashes. The prosecution had built an airtight case using Elena's evidence. RICO charges, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, tax evasion, securities fraud. The list of crimes seemed endless. But it was Elena's testimony about her mother's murder that held the courtroom spellbound. "Mr. Blackwood," the prosecutor said, "you've heard the defendant's recorded voice discussing the elimination of Maria Rodriguez. What was your reaction when you first heard that recording?" Elena looked directly at Harrison, seeing the man who had haunted her family for over 2 decades. "I felt relief," she said clearly. "Relief that my mother's death would finally be acknowledged for what it was, murder, and determination that no other family would suffer the way mine did." Harrison's defense attorney, an expensive lawyer from New York, tried to discredit the recordings, claiming they were taken out of context. But David Chen's testimony demolished those arguments. The IT director, now in witness protection, had provided not just the audio files, but the metadata proving their authenticity and the digital paper trail, showing exactly how the money laundering operation worked. Catherine Walsh testified about the systematic theft from employee pension funds, her voice steady as she detailed how Harrison had stolen the retirement savings of hundreds of workers. Several former employees broke down in tears as they described losing their life savings to fund Harrison's criminal activities. But perhaps the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. Vincent Torino himself, the aging crime boss, had been arrested 3 weeks after Harrison and faced life in prison under federal racketeering charges. In exchange for a plea deal, he had agreed to testify about the full extent of his relationship with Blackwood Technologies. "Harrison Blackwood approached my organization in 1988, Torino testified, his gravelly voice filling the silent courtroom. He needed our help, laundering money he'd stolen from his investors. In exchange, we got access to his technology infrastructure to clean our own funds. And what happened when Maria Rodriguez threatened to expose this arrangement?" the prosecutor asked. Torino glanced at Harrison with undisguised contempt. "Blackwood called me personally, said he had a problem that needed to be handled permanently. He was very specific that it should look natural. Did you order Maria Rodriguez's murder? I gave the order to one of my people to handle it. Made it look like heart failure brought on by stress. Easy enough when someone already has a heart condition." Elena closed her eyes, finally hearing the confirmation she'd needed for 23 years. Her mother hadn't died from the stress of poverty and overwork. She'd been murdered for trying to do the right thing. During cross-examination, Harrison's lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of organized crime extortion. But Torino's testimony destroyed that defense too. "Nobody forced Harrison Blackwood to steal that money in the first place," Torino said with a shrug. "And nobody forced him to keep working with us for 20 years. He made millions from our arrangement. The only thing he was a victim of was his own greed." The trial lasted 6 weeks, but the verdict took the jury only 4 hours to reach. Guilty on all counts, Judge Patricia Williamson, a stern woman in her 60s who had spent her career prosecuting organized crime, showed no mercy during sentencing. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, looking down at the man who had once been one of Silicon Valley's most powerful figures, "you have been convicted of crimes that span nearly 3 decades. You murdered an innocent woman to protect your criminal enterprise. You stole the life savings of hard-working employees. You corrupted our financial system and provided aid to organized crime. Harrison stood to hear his sentence, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Maria Rodriguez, plus an additional 45 years for the financial crimes. All assets of Blackwood Technologies and your personal holdings are hereby forfeited to compensate the victims of your crimes." The courtroom erupted in applause, which Judge Williamson allowed to continue for several moments before calling for order. But Eleanor's work wasn't finished with Harrison's conviction. The forfeited assets, nearly $2 billion, needed to be distributed to the victims, and she had been appointed as the administrator of the Victim Compensation Fund. Her first priority was restoring the stolen pension funds. Every employee who had lost retirement savings received full restitution plus interest. Catherine Walsh's daughter Rebecca got her job back with a promotion and a formal apology from Morrison Financial. The families of other victims of the Torino organization received compensation for their losses. Elena also established the Maria Rodriguez Foundation, using a portion of Harrison's seized assets to provide legal aid and support for immigrant workers who faced exploitation. The foundation operated out of a gleaming new building in downtown San Francisco, with Maria's portrait hanging prominently in the lobby. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Elena returned to the Blackwood mansion, now owned by the federal government and scheduled to be sold at auction. She walked through the servants' quarters where she and her mother had lived, remembering the cramped room where Maria had played the music box every night. The room was exactly as Elena remembered it. Small, windowless, with barely enough space for a bed and dresser. It seemed impossible that she had once thought of this place as home. Elena sat on the narrow bed and opened her mother's music box one final time in the place where it had brought them both comfort during the darkest period of their lives. The melody filled the small room, and for a moment Elena could almost feel her mother's presence. "We did it, Mama," she whispered. "Justice for you and justice for everyone else he hurt." As the melody played, Elena thought about the long journey from that 14-year-old girl who'd been escorted off this property with nothing, to the successful businesswoman who had brought down one of the most powerful criminals in the country. The path had taken 23 years, but Maria Rodriguez's daughter had finally kept her promise. The auction of the Blackwood mansion was held on a bright spring morning. Elena stood among the bidders, but she wasn't there to buy anything. She was there to watch as the symbols of Harrison's ill-gotten wealth were sold off piece by piece. With every dollar going to compensate his victims, the final item sold was Harrison's wine collection. Bottles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that would now fund scholarship programs for the children of immigrant workers. As the auctioneer's gavel fell for the last time, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for over 2 decades. Outside the mansion, reporters waited for Elena's reaction to the end of the Blackwood saga. This was never about revenge, she told them. Standing in front of the estate where her mother had died, it was about justice. It was about ensuring that powerful people can't murder innocent women and steal from hard-working families without consequences. "What's next for you?" a reporter asked. Elena smiled, thinking of the music box safely stored in her apartment and the foundation that would carry on her mother's legacy. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to another family. The Maria Rodriguez Foundation will fight for workers' rights and hold corrupt employers accountable. My mother died trying to expose the truth, but her sacrifice will protect others for generations to come." As Elena walked away from the Blackwood mansion for the final time, she thought about the circular nature of justice. Harrison Blackwood had started with nothing and built an empire through crime and murder. Now he had nothing again, spending the rest of his life in a federal prison cell, while the money he'd stolen was being used to help the very people he'd exploited. Vincent Torino had also been sentenced to life in prison, his criminal organization dismantled by federal agents. The entire money laundering network that had operated for decades was gone, its leaders either in prison or in witness protection after cooperating with authorities. That evening, Elena stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, looking out over the San Francisco Bay. The city lights twinkled like stars, and she could see the building that housed the Maria Rodriguez Foundation in the distance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Walsh. "Saw the news coverage of the auction. Your mother would be so proud of everything you've accomplished," Elena smiled, remembering Maria's final words in the hospital. "Promise me you'll get it back someday." She had been talking about the music box, but Elena understood now that she'd meant something much larger. Their dignity, their justice, their place in a world that had tried to make them invisible. The music box sat on Elena's coffee table, its lid open, the melody playing softly in the evening air. But this time, the song didn't sound sad or nostalgic. It sounded like victory. Harrison Blackwood had thought he could destroy a poor immigrant woman and her daughter without consequences. He had been wrong. Maria Rodriguez's legacy lived on, not just in Elena's success, but in the foundation that would help thousands of other families fight for justice. As the music box's melody faded into the night, Elena closed the lid gently and picked up her laptop. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more victims to help, more powerful criminals to expose. The fight for justice never truly ended. But tonight, for the first time in 23 years, Elena Rodriguez felt truly at peace. Her mother's murder had been avenged. Her killer was in prison, and the money he'd stolen was being used to help others. The little girl, who had once felt powerless against the wealthy and corrupt, had grown up to become their worst nightmare. Harrison Blackwood's billion-dollar empire was gone, destroyed by the daughter of a maid who had refused to stay silent. In the end, truth and justice had proven more powerful than money and corruption. Maria Rodriguez could finally rest in peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.